Just call attention, please. I'd like to welcome everyone along to the stadium tonight. My name's Chris Dillon. I'm current Provincial President of Federated Farmers Southland. We're here tonight to discuss two very big issues in the province. Both these issues have been addressed by the farmers, and unfortunately the government has gone their own pathway, which has led to where we're at now. So, we've got on stage here, we've got the National President of Federated Farmers. I'd like to welcome Andrew Hoggard. Next, we've got the Winter Grazing spokesperson and the Arable Executive Chair, Colin Hurst. Colin's driven down from South Canterbury to be here tonight. Paul Melville, he's a Senior Policy Person with Feds. And Terry Copeland is the Chief Executive of Federated Farmers New Zealand. All these guys are going to be around afterwards to chat if there's time there. Continuing along, Vice President of Federated Farmers Southland, Bernadette Hunt. She's the previous Winter Grazing spokesperson and has done a lot of work in the water space. Wayne Langford, he's the Vice President of Federated Farmers New Zealand. Jason Herrick, he's a Junior Vice President of Federated Farmers and a new Winter Grazing spokesperson. And down the end we've got Gavin Forrest. Gavin's Senior Policy Man at Feds. There's a couple of little things to tick off here. Whoever was handing pamphlets out early on has got absolutely nothing to do with us. We have a few apologies here. Got Minister of Agriculture, Damien O'Connor. There's no surprise there. But he was invited. Minister of Climate Change, James Shaw. Todd Muller, David Seymour and Mark Cameron. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of our local MPs, Penny Simmons and Joseph Mooney, who've kindly come along to talk to you all. And also I'd like to acknowledge the chairpersons and senior staff of both our local councils. So between each session here, we're going to have time for some questions. There's going to be a couple of people running microphones around. There should be a number comes up on the screen if you're not comfortable with talking through the mic. You can text a question through to a number that's coming up on the screen shortly. So the questions, just please keep them as a question, not a novel, and we'll move on from there. So yeah, I'd like to welcome up the National President of Federated Farmers, Andrew Hoggard.
Thanks for your help with working the slider out, Chris. Good to see you all here. Really heartened to see this turnout. Fair to say most Feds meetings I go to is usually about 20, 30, 40 people. So this is bloody good to see such a turnout, and I guess it gives a good, clear indication of the concern that everyone's got with, obviously, He Waka Eke Noa, or the whole climate tax thing, and also the winter grazing process. Hope everyone can hear me over the netball game. It sounds like they're having fun back there. So look, the first thing I want to touch on is the fact that we should be bloody proud of what we do as farmers. The slide you've got there shows what we contribute to this economy, and you can see particularly in recent years, while everyone else was locked down, other sectors went backwards, collapsed. Our sectors kept New Zealand going through this pretty tough time, and despite some pretty bloody horrific legislation that was coming our way, we kept chugging along, and we should be damn proud of what we do for this country. And at times I know people feel like everyone's on our case, but actually, as we'll show you later, we do have a fair bit of public support behind us. So That's the first point. And I guess, yeah, that sort of covers it up a bit, adds a bit more stats to the whole thing. I won't kill you by death by PowerPoint. I'll keep it short and sharp. The other thing we've got to be damn proud of, and I try to make sure I include this every time I'm talking to media, is our low footprint for, in terms of carbon emissions or equivalent emissions per kg of product. Now, the slides you'll see on there I should have bought my glasses actually. Beef and sheep, and on the other side it's dairy. Yep, I must be getting old. And then, yeah, here's another one for dairy, and it shows where we rank internationally, which is at the top. And, it's a simple stat. Basically we are 2/3 of the emissions of the next best in the world, and we're a third lower, or yeah, 3 times lower than the world average. So given all of that, why are we facing this? And I guess we go back to this argument that's been running for 20 years in this country, and why did we even get in the tent is I guess the first question a lot of farmers have. Why did we get in behind this? Obviously the next question is, what the hell's the government come out with, what we can't accept, and what's the way forward? So why are we here? Now, basically in the 2017 election, in the coalition agreement, it was a part of it that agriculture would be introduced. Agriculture was already in the ETS. We were just at a 0% or 100% free allocation. And the proposal was it was to reduce to 95%. Now, as a sector, we knew what sort of damage a blunt mechanism like that would occur on our farms, and so the proposal, and that was going to start in 2020. So that would have had been happening for 2 years already. And the proposal was, instead, let us come up with something that works, is a hell of a lot more practical to be applied on farm, but there were some key principles in the document that we thought, and particularly Feds fought damn hard to have in there. And that was that the price was only ever supposed to be part of a broader framework of actions and it was to incentivise the uptake of mitigations, and only to the extent necessary, to contribute to lower global emissions. So those were some key points in that founding document. And it's fair to say throughout the whole process, I think I've said it in several member advisories and stuff, the link back to those original principles has just gotten more and more tenuous as we've gone along the process. And, finally the government proposal was sort of the knife that cut that link. Now, I want to be clear on one thing. We've always opposed the 10% by 2030 target. What we submitted on in the Zero Carbon Bill was utilising the latest work, which I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with, in terms of the recognition that stable methane doesn't add to additional warming. That's the whole GWP star metric. Well, I've been told not to talk about metrics because it confuses people, but it is the principle that it's a short-lived gas. It breaks down real quick. If your emissions are stable, that means everything's in balance, and you don't need to, as long as we're stable, we don't need to make dramatic cuts like the long-lived gases. So that's sort of why we got in there. We had the threat of the ETS hanging over us. We put forward an option to the government. We could come up with, as a sector, a better option, and pricing would be part of that. Initially, from Feds, we tried to argue that we didn't want pricing in there, but everyone else was of the opinion that pricing had to be a part of it, otherwise the government would reject it. And so we went along with it because we felt, at least then, if we're in the tent, we could push back, keep providing that sort of tension, keeping that farmer voice in there, And certainly throughout the process, we have managed to at least get some changes, some wins, keep some stupid things out of it. But it has been bloody hard work. Now, government proposal. Now, you'll have seen many things on where the government's changed the proposal. And I think probably to sum it up for me, and it's not really implicit in just looking at the detailed changes. It still looks the same for a lot of people, but the reality is this has moved from a levy to a tax. It's gone from being a research levy to pretty much a blunt tax to meet the reduction targets. And that's probably the biggest change in there that has really driven it. In the original proposal, and I was never a particular fan of the May proposal, but the only thing in there that sort of gave me hope was the pricing principles. And it wasn't just about the trajectory towards the targets, but it was also a balance with, we need to maintain the socio-economic sort of stability of the rural communities. There needs to be mitigations available. Are there mitigations available? What is the emissions leakage risk? And also food security. Those were sort of four balancing things on top of the targets that in theory was supposed to be considered. Now the government proposal is basically throwing those four out, and it is solely about the targets. And that's where it's changed quite dramatically in my opinion. There are other things, so the change to the governance, it's now been set by the Minister with advice from the Climate Change Commission as opposed to a supposed industry body. I honestly don't know if that's such a die-in-the-ditch thing, to be honest. To me, any committee would have to be approved by the Minister anyway, so it's going to be people that are amenable to the Minister, even if they're from agriculture, and so is the Minister going to have the say anyway? So I was never a particular fan. Well, I was never a particular fan of being able to set a price through a committee. I don't think it's a sensible way of doing it. Soviet Russia tried it. North Korea is still trying it. Doesn't seem to have worked very well in either of those places. Another issue was obviously sequestration being reduced in the government proposal. And so, the sequestration, it was and it is important. We have to be, if the government intends to penalise people for what they perceive as the bad, they've got to reward them for what's the good. And that's been basically thrown out. But I think it's a key thing to remember because of the government has a gross methane target, not a net methane target. And so that means the price or those reductions have to be made. And so if we were all plant more trees and everywhere on our farms that we could plant trees and not affect production, yep, cool, well, we should be doing that anyway. And we get all these credits for it, that masks the pain from the price, which we'd probably all consider good, but the government would actually consider that bad because they need the pain to make effectively 10% of us drop out. And so you've got to think of it that way, is they need a gross reduction. And at the moment, without mitigations, a 10% gross reduction only comes from 10% less dry matter going down ruminants' throats. And so that is a key thing. And to me, that is the fundamental change the government has made, is that change to the pricing principles and that singular focus on achieving the targets at all costs to our communities. So that's some of if you haven't already seen it, and I imagine most of you would have, that's some of the economic cost. As we put in our press release that went out that morning, it rips the guts out of rural communities. And apparently that line didn't go down very well in the beehive, which I'm so very deeply upset about. I consider that my KPI for the year achieved, actually. But yeah, you can see Now, you will have heard, so one thing we've been looking at is the sheep and beef venison reduction in production, nice rhyming. You'll have heard the figure 20% bandied about. We've actually got there 29. You're probably wondering, where does that come from? And because we, quite frankly, looking at this modelling, there is modelling that shows there will be a 29% reduction, and if you want to get into more details, Paul's the one that's been reading it, so I'll put questions to him on that. But there is this assumption that there is going to be a bolus available for beef cattle of this the special seaweed stuff they're throwing all the research money at, that'll be able to be used across the beef sector, and so some of the reductions in sheep will come and be replaced by additional beef animals. So they're assuming there's actually going to be an increase in beef. But quite frankly, last time I was in the vet clinic, I didn't see any such boluses. I don't think there's, and I try and keep up to track with all of the research that's happening in this space. And to be honest, from what I've heard of the whole seaweed stuff, we're still many years away from being, anywhere remotely commercial in it. And so that we would have these products available in the next 3 to 4 years in the scale they're suggesting, I think is very much wishful thinking. So we actually think the impacts on sheep and beef will be quite higher. In terms of the ETS backstop, and that's another component to it, is it's even worse. And to be brutally honest, I think if the government sticks to its knitting, or sticks to its guns and refuses to back down, that's probably the scenario we're going to end up in. Because the reality is, for them to try and do anything at farm level, because they've got a 1st of January start date, they're not going to have this legislation passed until middle of next year. Most of you, if you're particularly dairy farmers, and all the reporting we do, it starts on the 1st of June. So to have numbers for the 1st of January, that means we have to start the recording system on the 1st of June 2024. Now this is a challenge actually we've been arguing about since 2019 in terms of how this has all been written up. We've constantly been telling them the dates they keep putting in will not work because they're not based on a production year. They need to change these dates to be based on a production year. So effectively, if we're saying this isn't going to come about until the legislation till mid-23, and then we're going to need to start recording in mid-24, that's a truckload of work that's got to happen, and we consider the fact that a very simple thing like nitrogen reporting has taken them 2 years and it was still delayed. And I just remembered I need to fill that in before Monday. And also, the farm plans, this farm plan pathway that Colin will get into later. That again, they don't have the ability to deliver any of this stuff. And even though some of you may be going, well, I've already got my number, I've already doing it in this system. The problem is it's got to translate to a government system. It's got to be put into a government system, and I can guarantee you, Hannah, I don't think they're going to have a shit show in hell, to use some French language, of getting any of that put in place within that time frame. So in all likelihood, they'll go, can't be done, and boom, here we go, backstop. And that is, as you can see, 9.5% reduction for dairy, 42% for sheep and beef. Absolute carnage. So, basically, it's a complete dog's breakfast of, now none of you will be able to read that slide. I think we've got handout, I definitely can't read that slide. I think we've got handouts available, correct? So that goes through some of the modelled impacts on various farming systems. So find those handouts and you'll be able to, but if you want to work out the costs for your farms, here are some calculations we have worked out. So if all the young players in the room will be flipping out their phones and zooming and taking a photo of that right now. I see a few young people. But that is how you can work out. And certainly, if you want this information later, just, I guess, Terry, contact the 0800 number or contact Bernadette or contact us somehow and we can get that through to you if you don't get a bit of paper with it on today. As I mentioned before, there is public support for us. So we did last week polling with Courier, one of the sort of national polling companies, so all official, not random little email survey that we chuck out. We did one of those as well, which got quite good response. And yeah, so the first question we asked was, do you think New Zealand should price agricultural emissions before other countries do? Now, only 26% of the population said yes, 17% unsure, 57% no. So and then we asked a few more questions. Would you support agricultural emissions pricing if it was to make 1 in 5 sheep and beef farmers, to put them out of business? And then it actually rose up to 60% opposed. And so you'll have possibly recalled several stories. I think they've played the last couple of years, or in this last year, where they've done polling on should we halve the herd to meet emissions targets, and the numbers were just over 50%. So I think the fact that we did this just after the announcement, and I think the public response, so we've seen, in my view, a lift of the public realising that this is actually a bloody stupid idea, because it is going to impact food production. It's going to impact, while already so many people are dealing with a cost of living crisis, this is going to impact their bank balance, and it's also becoming real. When you say, oh, do you want to reduce the herd by half, it's sort of like when there's no actual real proposals out there to do it, you're going to have people say, oh yeah, because they don't think it's real. But now it's becoming real, and I think we're seeing the public support actually move in behind farmers here. So I think I want to stress this point. It's important as a farming sector, we recognise that the public is behind us and that we don't sort of fall into a trap of thinking everyone's against us and this is all the fault of cities and the countryside's better. Let's not go down that path. We've got the public on board. This isn't an urban-rural disconnect. It's an everyone-Wellington disconnect. And that's, I think that's important for how we respond going forward. It's important to be, good with our engagement with urban people, bringing home to them the cost that it's going to have for all New Zealand. Not just us in the countryside, not just the people in the provincial towns, but this is going to impact all New Zealand. So, where the hell do we stand? Apparently, lots of people keep telling me I'm not clear enough, that I'm not blunt enough. And I struggle with this because I think I'm really bloody blunt. But, so, I will try and be exceptionally blunt with where we... So our board had a meeting last week? Yes, yep. Time flies when you're having fun. And so what we're putting to our National Council, that hopefully will get their support next week, or hopefully sometime soon, is that from this point forward, in terms of where Federated Farmers stand on this whole issue is, we are not going to support anything until there is a review of the agricultural emissions pricing, the targets. So the targets need to be based on, as I mentioned earlier, what is the actual additional warming caused by agriculture? It's got to be, they've got to review them using that science. And so we've got realistic targets that actually state the impact that we in New Zealand are having, and more in tune with what the reality, what a lot of the literature is talking about now. So in our submission on the zero carbon bill, we had submitted that it should only be a 0.3% reduction per year, so 10% by 2050, not 2030, 2050. And that lines up with a lot of the work that's been done Oxford University and here in Wellington, in New Zealand. But also, along with that, we would only support any mechanism so long as there are viable mitigations available. It makes no sense for us to reduce production here in New Zealand, just have it replaced offshore, even though the government pretends that there is no such thing as emissions leakage. There definitely is. It's vital that you can't tax people if they haven't got an alternative, or you can't provide an incentive to get people to change their behaviour if there's nothing they can change their behaviour to. So that is another bottom line for us, that must happen. And then the no emissions leakage. Okay, if we're going to do stuff that's supposedly about combating climate change, then it should actually combat climate change. It shouldn't actually increase global emissions, which is what this proposal is intending will actually do. So I hope that's clear enough. That is what the board has proposed. It's hopefully what the National Council, and I'm pretty sure, judging by all the email traffic, that is where we will land. I just want to touch on, and this is a fascinating graph that I only just saw on the weekend on social media. And so what this is a satellite. It's one of these satellites that measures global methane emissions. And you will have heard a lot of stuff about, the global or the target globally needing to be 30% and methane pledges of 30%, etc. And there's been numerous IPCC reports coming out talking about the need for 30% reduction globally, how we can achieve that. And usually the debate switches in New Zealand to, that means we've got to reduce 30% of the cows and the sheep. No, what it says is globally, and this is what gets lost in so much of the detail in these reports, no one reads it, they just read the headline. And in so many of these reports, they talk about where those reductions can come from. And this map of the globe shows you exactly where those reductions can come from. You see that big red area, that's where your methane emissions are coming from. And if you look at it globally, some of those reports globally, they've talked about the cheapest fix and the best solutions will be fixing leaky oil wells. And so you can see Saudi Arabia, quite a big red spot there. You've got Europe. When they talk about agricultural, in terms of agricultural reductions, it's about manure management. And so that, and also the second, and agriculture only comes in third, the second place is sort of rubbish management. And so I'm guessing, the manure management and the rubbish refuge management, that's where Europe's emissions are coming from, and probably moving into Russia there, that's their oil and gas sector. South Asia, that bit, that's probably rice paddies. That belt going through India, that's where all their 3 litre a day cows are housed or placed. And you can see down little old New Zealand blue. And so, to me, globally, our politicians love to just quote these reports from global things saying we've got to do 30%, but they never look at the detail, and that to me shows you the detail of where globally it should be happening and the focus that where it globally should be on. And so we've covered that, and I'm sure someone will bring it up. What about the carbon cycle? So here's the slide. Yes, I know about the carbon cycle. I assume everyone else in the room also knows about the carbon cycle, but it's always good just to put it up there so that everyone does know we do know it. Now that's the number, I think, for the questions. So that possibly feels quite short from me. Okay, it doesn't? No, okay. Sorry, usually I ramble for quite a bit. But that's probably enough talking, because what we want to get to is your questions, not me prattling on. So how this is working. Yeah. So someone's got microphones out there, don't they? This is going to be simple. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'd like to know, the Paris Accord said this was not supposed to affect food production. So what's the story with this?
Yep, so the wording in the Paris Accord is we should reduce emissions whilst maintaining food production. That's the exact wording, and it was actually put in there by former Feds President William Ralston, who was on the, well, that's William's claim anyway, so we'll back it up. So he was the acting president of the World Farmers Organisation at the time. And so, yeah, you know, to me, that statement states that, you know, we need, as a globe, we need to produce food in the most efficient manner possible. So we've got to keep producing food. We can't let that drop. There's lots of hungry people out there. But we need to do it as efficiently as possible. And so, which means that, you know, countries should be striving to reduce their footprint. And that's why I've gone back to that slide. To me, that's exactly what the Paris Accord talks about. It talks about the rest of the world catching up to us. Now, there's the potential they will catch up to us. And so it's not a case of us resting on our laurels and doing nothing, but it's a case of us staying on top of our game and maintaining those efficiencies and always looking for ways to improve, not for getting taxed out of existence.
Talk. Yeah, everybody, can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Righto. Now, this methane tax, what's it based on? Science or Doctor Who?
Basically, it's well, they haven't actually come up with a number yet. So, in terms of what the actual tax amount, we've just, in this document, there are some proposed numbers, but there's no hard number on it. In terms of why they think they need to tax, if I get that as the gist of your question, it goes back to this, I guess, what I was just talking about in that last slide, this assumption that we've got to make drastic cuts to New Zealand's methane emissions to do our bit globally. Whereas, as you saw from the world thing, we're actually, you know, and that graph, we're already doing our bit globally. And to me, that, you know, the focus should be on us maintaining how we're going. Now, a pricing mechanism could play a role in that, but with the way the government set the targets, it's not going to achieve that outcome of us sort of sticking on top of the world. It could actually make that graph worse, quite frankly. And it's going to have poor implications for New Zealand economy and farming.
Yeah. Is it on?
Yep, still on.
Why can't we claim on our grass, which absorbs 24 tonnes per hectare per year? Now, there was in the magazine a while ago that we can't claim anything until it's over 5 metres. Now, how does the vegetation get up to 5 metres if it doesn't eat CO2?
Yeah. So with grass, I guess, key thing here is, so my understanding, so I've asked this question numerous times of people in charge of the inventory and other scientists in this area. So, and I'm not the expert, I'm just going to give you what their answer is. But basically, in terms of the inventory, they don't account for the CO2 our animals are emitting. They balance that CO2 off against the CO2 that is absorbed by the grass. And so they're netting it off in the cycle, if that makes sense. and it is viewed as being part of the cycle. So it doesn't, and because it's constantly moving in that cycle, it's not actually sequestering. So with the whole thing of being able to claim a credit, it's about adding sequestration, whereas our farming systems are maintaining that level of sequestration. They're not adding to it, is my understanding of the arguments. Where are we?
Look, I thought I've got a question for you,
Yep.
but I just thought I'd add a quick comment to what you just said. One of the things that I find a little difficult to understand with that is that in Australia and New Zealand and, Australia, the US and Europe, they are looking at projects that sequester carbon in soil. So, have feds looked at Australian certified carbon units as part of that? But the real question I wanted to ask actually was, how much thought has been put into the fact that there's an uncapped price mechanism proposed currently, which means that if you have a single entity like the Climate Commission behaving a bit like the Reserve Bank with a single target, you get to 2028, that target's not being met, the price will adjust to meet that target. And if it's uncapped and there isn't industry input into that, I see that as a real risk.
Yep. So the first point in terms of soil carbon, I guess the key difference between New Zealand soil, so again, I'm not a soil scientist, so talking to soil scientists, this is what I've gathered. Their soils are much older and a lot more depleted, and so they can build soil carbon. And I guess what's going to happen there is they're going to build their soil carbon back up to a level that ours is already at. And so we're actually reasonably well balanced in terms of soil carbon levels in New Zealand, because, dare I bring up the buzzword of regenerative, but, the whole focus there is about this weird concept of rotational grazing of pastures by livestock that no one else has apparently heard of, and how it builds up soil carbon, etc. So we've been doing that for 100 plus years. So our soils are pretty damn good already. And so, yeah, it is frustrating that I guess they'll be able to claim credit for getting to where we already are at. Now, there is, certainly we have in the working groups and everything, been encouraging more work to look into soil carbon and whether or not there are gains we can make from it. But there are risks as well with having soil carbon in any sort of system, and that, yes, you can get a credit if you gain it, but you might also pay a penalty if you lose it. And in a drought situation, you can lose it quite quickly. So there's those sort of things that need to be worked through. So it's not a clear-cut thing. We have been looking into it. What was the uncapped price? Yes, I mean, that is the major concern with, the government proposal is, if the targets aren't being met, they just keep increasing the price until the targets are met. And because, basically the price works on a simple principle that it needs to, without mitigations, it's basically going to force however many percentage of farmers, or stop X amount of dry matter being eaten by a ruminant. That's the sole purpose of it. To drop that, and so if no mitigations become available, we've got a clear, simple thing of it's got to reduce the amount of dry matter consumed by animals by 10% by 2030. That's how you get your 10% reduction in methane. Sorry? Oh, can you grab the microphone for the gentleman? Oh, sorry.
Text question. Is
Yep.
Feds prepared to abort HWN completely if government doesn't relent?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Is Feds prepared to abort HWN completely if government doesn't relent?
So we've stated our position. I dare say that that position does not endure us to staying in that partnership. So it kind of, taking that position will kind of make that decision for us. It'll be up to the other partners as to whether they want to abort it or not, but I'm getting the sense they will be sticking with their May proposal, whereas we've put our bottom lines on that there has to be a review of the targets before we meet. We agree to any pricing mechanism, and we're only going to agree to a pricing mechanism that is there for uptake of mitigations and doesn't cause emissions leakage. Sorry, the gentleman here had a question. If someone get a mic to him.
Andrew, got one over here.
Okay.
G'day, Andy. Hey, just wondering if people are aware of what happens to the value of any sequestration that may be counted moving forward as that free allocation drops down? Because I've had some numbers around and it's quite scary as to how valueless it becomes over time. And just the second point, why are the governments so opposed to using GWP Star?
Okay. First point. Paul, do you want to sequestration? I'll give it a crack and then Paul can correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, look, basically as free allocation winds down, the numbers become scarier and scarier. So I played around with some figures from my place, trying to match it up against a proposal that had an alternative proposal that I've been talking to a bunch of farmers about, and put it up against the current ETS with the free allocation dropping down. And basically, it just sort of, as you drop that free allocation, it sort of exponentially grows. I think by 2030, oh geez, what was I at to? A good 20 odd K sort of, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. I'll just finish on the second bit. GWP Star. So I guess, and it gets quite technical, that whole GWP. So what we don't want to try and say is we should use that at a farm level, because it's not appropriate at a farm level. Personally, I think the ideal should be that it should be used at a global level. So setting a global target, because quite frankly, because how it works for those that are unfamiliar is, as I mentioned before, the 0.3% reduction per year. Now, is that fair for, say, well, the Ukraine right now? If we were to bring that in, they've just had half their agriculture smashed by Russian tanks, and we're saying, oh, you've got to keep reducing by 0.3% per year. They need to be allowed to get back to where they were. Same with countries like, Zimbabwe. 40, 50 years of socialism has done wonders to their agricultural community. And, they used to be the breadbasket of Southern Africa. Now they're just a basket case. So you've got to allow countries that were able, developing countries or countries that have been held back to actually increase. But you want to be doing it focusing on keeping, as you increase, you reduce the emissions intensity. But then you've got countries like Europe that probably could meet the 0.3% reduction each year, but their emissions per kg of product are reasonably high. And so you should be saying to them, well, actually, guys, you can reduce by more. And then maybe a country like New Zealand with very low footprint, we're saying, well, actually, we need more out of you, New Zealand. Go farm more. That's never going to happen. So that's my ideal world, but that's never going to happen. So the best case scenario, I think, is applying that GWP Star to the New Zealand target. Gav, did you have something to add on the secret? It's all right. Okay. You can ask me later, Ben.
Andrew, we've got several questions coming in from
text. The most interesting one we've just found over here is, does Fed Farmers have a strategy to inform and keep our urban cousins on side?
I'd like to hope we, yeah, well, so basically that involves me writing lots of columns.
Yes.
And we need to, well, you're in the comms team, Rebecca, so that involves a bit more work for you
Yes.
to get more of that out there. And I think, yes, that is the key thing. We've got to explain this to average New Zealanders, what that means. You know, go back to that sort of graph I had of the map of the world and all those emissions. And, you know, because people keep hearing this 30% reduction that's required, 30% reduction. You know, showing them that picture, you know, as I say, a picture paints 1,000 words. And I think by being able to get that in front of urban audiences, make them understand, yeah, actually, yes, it may have to happen internationally, but actually here's where it needs to happen internationally, not in little old New Zealand.
One more from text. Where does Dairy NZ and Beef and Lamb really stand on all of this? How cohesive are you all? Sorry.
Yeah, thanks to whoever sent that. Though it's fair to say they're pretty keen to just get back to the May proposal. We're obviously wanting to take a tougher stance, and so I don't think that's a bad thing, quite frankly. You know, that's our job to push hard for what farmers want. If they want to play the middleman and negotiate, it's up to them. You're all the ones that vote for them. I do as well, I suppose. And, you know, I sort of feel like, you know, we've got our principles. We've sort of got to the point of, I guess, you know, it's been 2.5 bloody years or more of dumb regulation after dumb regulation after dumb regulation. And for me, it's just like, nah, screw it. I'm done with being polite about it. And, yeah. So that's where I'm at anyway. Yeah.
Next question. Will a change of government help the situation for farmers in New Zealand?
You want to jump up and scream yes, Joseph? No, yeah. Oh, sorry. Text number, yep. So, was in Christopher Luxon's office last night with Joseph, and I mean, perhaps they can speak for themselves, but the message I got was that they weren't willing to endorse the government's proposal whatsoever in the current form, and their view was, correct me if I'm wrong, but the government needs to offer us some wins on a few other things as well. Do you want to correct? It's your party, not mine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Joseph Mooney, everyone. Look, we will not accept the government's proposal. It makes absolutely no sense to reduce New Zealand's food production and increase global emissions via emissions leakage, which is their proposal. We won't accept 1 in 5 sheep and beef farmers going out of business by 2030, which is their proposal. We think there needs to be an industry-led solution or proposal to this. We also think that the Labor government has just been sending too many balls over the net and too many unworkable regulations, quite frankly. Christopher Luxon says it's like having 10 tennis balls come over the net at once. You can't actually hit any of them. So, look, the government actually needs to step back and take another look at this. And look, we endorse, like I said, an industry-led proposal, but there also needs to be a bit more than that.
I suppose the key thing too is that we don't want to get ahead of the science and the technology, and we don't want to get ahead of the other competitor countries. So by putting in a pricing mechanism without the science and technology to mitigate the emissions, it's just a tax. It's just a tax taking more money off you. And so yes, we want the research and development to happen, and we want the science and technology there to be able to lower the emissions, but we need to be doing it in step. So pricing can't get ahead of that, and pricing can't get ahead of our competitor countries, and we can't put our food security at risk, and so we're very, very mindful of that.
Okay. Gentleman down there had a question. No, not.
Going?
Yep.
We've got to a stage we hear lots of dribble and carry on. We're sick of it. We had politicians just stood up then. They should have taken their tissues out because the amount of dribble that came out of their mouths was unbelievable. We're at the stage we need some action because you guys have beaten against the death brick wall. She will not listen.
Yep.
Time we take matters into our own hands. Do you know that every airport and every port in New Zealand has one way in? What is that telling you? If they don't want to listen to us, that's probably our next step. Because you can yap and talk and committee as much as you like, but for God's sake, nothing's come out of it but a whole lot of dribble.
Well, that's where I'd point to this again. So if we want to block airports, we want to block ports and all the rest of it, we lose that 57%. That 57% gets you a change in government. So the key thing is we keep banging on about this stuff. Yeah, it may seem like a waste of time, blah, 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 hot air. But it is, and it pisses me off because I'd rather be bloody farming and I'd rather not have to try and AI cows and talk on the phone at the same time. But we need to keep that number where it is. Because if we keep that number where it is, you will get a change of government or, well, hopefully we get a change of government. But they make, politicians these days respond to polls. So the polls change, they change. And that's the focus needs to be, is making sure all of New Zealand is behind us. And that's where I think the best solution will come. That's what will make the change. Yes, we have to wait to October, but that's how we make the change. None of this stuff that's proposed in here is going to hit till 2025. So that's an election away. So it's not going to hit us this week or next month or next year. We will have an election before then. And so it's important to maintain public support through to that point. Not the answer you want to hear, but it's what I think is the solution. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
So taking a step back,
Yep.
in general, you've talked about a lot of the issues that you've got with the proposal, which I understand. Are there any good parts to the proposal? Like if you try to be just really objective, we know there's some shit stuff, but yeah.
So split gas, yeah, and it's kind of sad that was in there from day one. In terms of, that's the main thing, is that you do have that split gas approach to it. That's something we pushed for hard. We did want a different target. Probably the incentive payments, that is, like if you had a decent target, right? So even without a decent target, it's all crap, to be blunt. But with a decent target, you took the current proposal, you've got those incentive payments that reward you for doing the right thing. That's less money going into, it's more money going back to, well, not going out of farmers' pockets to start with. I always viewed that, and it was something that our person on the steering group pushed really hard to get over the line and get into that model. I would have preferred to go a step further because the incentive payments, they recognise actions, they don't recognise outcomes. And to me, outcomes are, a low footprint per kg of product. You can't, how do you measure an individual, because a lot of the outcome that can come from a farm is based on the farmer themselves, their level of input, their knowledge, their willingness to work hard and make smart decisions and timely decisions. So, someone may very well buy all the little whiz-bang products, but then spend all their time in the pub, and they may, have completely rubbish outcomes from their farm, but because they're buying all this stuff, they may get, quite a reduction to the guy that's not buying any of the whiz-bang stuff, but it's just bloody solid farmer and actually getting the good outcomes. So to me, the incentive payments, yeah, they're good. I always viewed them as a stepping stone to more of a rebate system, so that if you had decent, again, I stress, targets have got to be changed. Any system with the current targets is hiding to nothing. And so if you had a rebate payment, then you could have a situation where good farmers are rewarded, everyone in the middle has no touch, and those at the wrong end of the bell curve get a boot to encourage them to move up the bell curve.
Thank you.
Okay. Where's Bryce? When did you call me? When? Friday? Saturday? Yeah. Oh, so the question was, are we talking to Groundswell, and if not, why not? And I said, I believe I talked to Bryce on Friday or Saturday, or maybe even earlier this week. So yes, Bryce's number is saved into my phone, and I think my number's saved into his phone.
I'd like to ask, given that New Zealand has 1/3 of its land in native bush forest, and that we're blue on that global map, meanwhile the government are trying to tax farmers off the land by death by 1,000 cuts, while meanwhile over in Germany they're now calling nuclear power and natural gas actually a natural gas, so why is methane not in the same basket? And it's ridiculous. It's just a rort on farmers. And we're upset.
Yeah, yeah. Not sure what the question. Yeah, agree. Yes. Where are we? Oh.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, there seems to be quite a sort of a growing issue globally around farmers being targeted around this emissions situation. Are you guys talking to your overseas counterparts about this?
Yep, so I would have got, so the day after it was announced, I got a phone call from Western Australian counterpart. I had a good long chat to him. Also got a text message from the chairman of the Indian Dairy Association, and contacted by America and Netherlands. So I'm actually on the board of the International Dairy Federation as well, and I have tried numerous times to, and we're involved in the World Farmers Organisation as well. So Katie Mill, now my past president, she is the vice president of that. So we've got a number of sort of linkages where we're trying to push this in. I hope the fact that this is, to be honest, up until this point, they all seem to want, they've generally sort of played this whole, let's just talk about cool things we're going to do and make lots of wild promises, and everyone will ignore us because CO2 is the big thing. And their national sort of inventories, they don't have all the hydro we've got, and so, the agricultural sectors are sort of masked in terms of the population. And so they haven't really, what I've tried to push, they haven't really wanted to go there. They just don't want to upset the apple cart, and they think if they sort of do any sort of smart, we've got to push, I've tried to encourage, hey, we should be pushing for a more specific global target rather than allowing all this talk of 30% methane. You know, we've got to be separating ourselves out from the fossil fuels, etc. We've got to really emphasise the need for actually what does agricultural methane need to do globally and focus on that. But, you know, it's, yeah, they haven't wanted to draw attention to themselves. Speaking previously of the Indian guy, it was interesting, he actually spoke at the World Dairy Summit, which I was at, and someone asked him the question, what does sustainability mean to you? And from their perspective, it meant a full belly. That's all it meant, nothing more. And so, you know, developing around the world, developing countries, they're not interested in any of this stuff. And the developed countries, basically, they seem to want to hide.
Why are our farming service companies so absent from these conversations? Balance, PGG, Farmlands, Fonterra, etc.
Well, I guess some of the service companies, they haven't been involved in the discussions. Fonterra, they're not actually they're a participant through the Dairy Companies Association of New Zealand. And to be fair, in many of the discussions we've had, it has been often decans that have actually had feds back, possibly because their chairman lives just down the road from me and was a former Feds president as well. The new chairman now, so I'm not sure how that'll go. But yeah, I certainly will be talking to some of these businesses as well. But yeah, I don't, because I guess they haven't been involved, so they probably don't understand the implications, and they're probably gaining that understanding. And I think probably a way of helping them gain that understanding is you as their shareholders and customers, you know, bringing it home to them as to what this is going to mean for you on farm and your purchasing decisions. And, you know, that's going to be one way to help us in this, is if, you know, it's not just the big ones, it's all the small ones as well, getting them to understand, hey, what's this going to mean to our town if, you know, there's 20% less farmers buying at my store? What does that have the flow-on effect through the community? One over here. Yep.
Yeah, hello, Andy. I'm interested when you speak of your position in the global dairy industry, and you speak about a group of farmers that not long ago were protesting, and that was the Indian farmer was going out in mass, and they were being hosed down, and some died. Now, at the last meeting you addressed, you were pro that the Indian farmer would be brought into line, becoming a large dairy farmer instead of the one or two cows. Do you still maintain that view, given that they are our colleagues? And in New Zealand, we have a wonderful group of Indian business people and farmers. I want to hear from you, because I certainly heard from them that our president is a harsh man in relationship to their production. Could you give me an answer on that, please?
So I do see that, I mean, I was over there recently, and so I did visit a farm where they had 200 cows. And quite frankly, I see that as the future of where they're going to go. It's just what's happened around the rest of the world. It's where they will move to. It's just going to be that natural, you know, geez, we only got to go back 50, 60 years. Was it my granddad would have had 60 cows? I've got 560. So that is going to be the transition that they will go through. I don't think it's anything to be scared by. And, you know, when they talk about their goals of getting to 43% of world milk supply, they can probably do that, and they can probably keep their footprint the same as it was through that improvement. I mean, the average cow, I think, was giving 2 to 3 litres, whereas in that farm I visited, which was part owned by a New Zealander, they're, you know, not super production that some of you will be getting, but, you know, pretty damn respectable. And that is sort of where I think their sector will move over time.
I would also like to say the thought is that New Zealand dairying is under pressure, that the globalists would like to see all dairying under management much stricter than just family farmers. And I like the thought that anybody starting out in our industries, no matter what they are, can get a stepping stone start, even if it's with 12 cows or 1 cow. I love that thought because that's where I started. And I love the industry we're in. And I want to advise you, if you want the support as a federation, do not shut down on the small international farmer. We need to invite young people in. I really want to bring that because I felt last time I listened to you, and I pondered this for a while, there seemed to be a harshness regarding the small, independent family farmer, the provider of food for their families.
Well, I am a family farmer, so I'm not sure how you got that impression. But there's always going to be, it's the nature of the world. There will be, slow increases in herd sizes, but we look across, the vast bulk of our membership are family farms. Now, family farms change over time, so they do get bigger, but I still think, the family farm is the formula for success. It may be a bigger family farm than what it used to be, but it's still that family farm. We're done.
Thanks a lot, Andrew, for all that. He's going to be around later for more questions. Just one little bit I missed earlier. There was a sheet going around with names on it. If it wasn't at the door on your way in, can you please sign it on the way out? Or I think they're getting passed around as well. I'm now going to introduce Colin Hurst, who's Winter Grazing spokesperson for Federated Farmers New Zealand.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for the invite down here. So I'm farming up in the Waimea district at the south end, in South Canterbury, so I've just driven down here today. So how does this work? So this is basically what we're going to cover off on here. Just look through that. Yeah, well, I guess I'd probably just like to start, Southland farmers, this is the heart for you, the winter grazing, and whenever I've been down here, you've had all grass wintering when you had a lot of sheep, and then you've obviously moved to dairying in a big way, and then, the wintering is such an important part for you farmers down here, and I'd just like to congratulate you at the magnificent job you've done over the last 3 or 4 years. You've picked up your game, and you've run ahead with it, and you've jumped ahead of the regulations, actually. And when we hear the reports from the Regional Council of when they've done the flyovers and whatnot, is an absolutely outstanding job. So congratulations everybody here that's involved in farming. This is what the regulations say. Basically, grazing and livestock on annual forage. And one of the questions we have got, does it include oats or cereals? So it's just more questions that we're posing. Essentially, this is the way the central government has come and dealt with this, and we all know the history of that. They started off in 2020, and this is what they come up with. The various pathways, the first one there, if you're a permitted activity, and I will go into the little bit more detail what that will mean after the next slide. And that's essentially when you're at a lot lower risk of some of the activities you're doing. The second pathway is this freshwater farm plan or farm planning, and this is where and we all know about farm environmental plans and that sort of stuff. And if you're supplying some of your supplying companies are requiring these sorts of things, more of a quality assurance type thing. So that's that pathway, and obviously the third pathway is the resource consent one, when you're obviously operating a lot more risky type of activities. So just going to explain a little bit more about the permitted activities, and obviously there's all these thresholds there. The first one is the amount, and this is it's either either under 50 hectares, under 50 hectares, or 10% of your farm, whichever is the greater. And that's sometimes you've got to just think about that a little bit. So basically, if you're a 200 hectare farm, you're allowed 50 hectares. And then if you move to, say, a 600 hectare farm, you're allowed, 50 hectares or 10% is 60 hectares, so that's what you're allowed there. The slope thing, that's another complicated thing. 10 degrees, it's not a hell of a lot. In the following slide, I'll explain a little more about that. And waterways, they need to be 5 metres away from any waterway or sort of drain. And the other little bit that complicates this as well, critical source areas. And this is sort of gullies or swales, and it's sort of where the water flows down. If you've got a rolling or undulating land, and if you're in rolling country, most paddocks will have a critical source area. But you basically, yeah, you need to keep away from those. You're not allowed to graze them, essentially not have them in winter crop. And it's also includes adjacent paddocks as well. So you could have a neighbour on your boundary that could have a critical source area, and they're potentially implicated too. So I'm not sure how the hell that's going to work. Yeah, so it's sort of essentially any sort of hilly country or depression, yeah, you're going to need, you potentially won't meet that permitted activity pathway. So this is a shot of, actually this is our farm. That's a paddock I've had sprayed off for quite a few weeks. This is going to go into fodder beet. And if you can see there, you know, we've got a lot of rolling country too. And we've got, obviously, I'm growing grain crops and seed crops, and then this is probably one of my flatter paddocks that was in grass seed last year, and we grazed it through and we sprayed it off, intending to put into fodder beet. So that we measured that, actually where I'm standing, that is actually just on the threshold of 10 degrees. So it's not a big slope at all. So I'll just talk about these pathways again, and we're calling them, and what the government have really let us down with. I explained about the permitted activity, pathway 1. The second pathway is these farm plans, and this is the one we're really annoyed about. In fact, we're pissed off about it. Government haven't done their job. This was supposed to be a package of dealing with this type of stuff. Permitted, if you're sort of not very risky. Pathway 2 was the farm planning method, and this is what, certainly in Canterbury, we've really been exposed to farm environmental plans through the Canterbury Regional Council, and we're pretty familiar with that up there. So this is where the government have done their bit. And when you're getting a bit more risky, you go and get the resource consent process. So it's that second pathway. It's the third leg of the stool that's not there. As the picture says, everything falls over. So what have the government done about this? These rules were introduced in 2020. They've been delayed because we've been lobbying really hard on this. And the government, in 2021, government said there was going to be 10,000 consents required. They were delayed again in May of this year because the regulations still weren't quite ready. And we've pushed really hard to get the minister to push out again because of that farm planning pathway wasn't there. And the government have pushed these rules back onto regional councils to try and implement. So the regional councils are essentially our friends in this process. They're caught just like us. Some councils are saying they're not necessarily going to enforce the law. That puts us in a really impossible situation. I'm sorry about this. Being really blunt, this is the crap we've been dealing with. A little bit about these 10,000 consents. Minister Parker is saying he doesn't necessarily think that's the case. We've done our survey across the country, and I hope some of you people here have filled in our survey to try and get a bit of a handle on that. When we've been talking to the regional councils, they seem to be telling us one thing, but they seem to be telling central government a different story. So between Southland, Otago and Canterbury, we reckon there's going to be about 6,500 consents. This is if by the letter of the law if everybody goes and gets one. And then it's just surprised us how much winter grazing happens in the North Island. And it's probably for a different purpose. It's probably more about some of the development that some of those farms are undertaking. And it's part of their pasture renewal sort of set up there. So there have been some, obviously that's the other 3,500 farmers that are going to need resource consent, so that brings it up to about the 10,000. Rightio. Well, that's sort of my bit. Now I'm going to hand over to Bernadette. Bernadette knows a lot about this, and we all know Bernadette, absolutely outstanding. I'm just a bit of a newbie on this. I just picked up the freshwater role when Chris Allen stepped down. So Bernadette's been dealing with this a lot longer than me. So I'm just going to hand over to Bernadette, and she's got to work through a bit of a what next situation for the Southland province.
So there's a few of the Southland crew going to join me on stage for this bit. So those of you that are joining me, come forward while I have a wee chat now. So what are we going to do about this in Southland? We've been calling for these regulations to be delayed because the government simply hasn't got their part of the process ready. So we are going to be making a stand in just a moment about these winter grazing consents. But before we do that, I just want to cover off a few things. So resource consents absolutely have their purpose. Lots of you have them for other purposes already. What they're supposed to do is place extra scrutiny where the highest risks are. But if thousands of people have to get them for an activity, that's not going to target the highest risk. It'll mean that councils can't adequately check them out in advance or enforce them. So it makes a complete mockery of the whole resource consent process. You'll pay a fee for a piece of paper, but there won't be anything behind it. That's why we don't support these winter grazing consents. And the deemed permitted activity that Environment Southland have put out isn't actually a lot better. We acknowledge Environment Southland's efforts to create a simple process, but it is still just paperwork for a fee, which isn't going to benefit the environment. Let's compare this to another high-risk activity, and I'm going to pinch something David Rose has been saying. Driving your car. If you drive a car, you're at risk of speeding. So applying the same logic, everyone should just pay up front for a speeding ticket, right? Would we buy that? I don't think so. So why would we buy this? There is a but, though. We are not going to apologise for or defend idiots who operate without regard for environmental or animal welfare. That just makes all of us look bad. So we won't be apologising for or defending them. So everyone does need to keep on doing the right thing, like we have been. Identify the risks, put mitigations in place, document your plan, and most importantly, capture some evidence, especially now. Photos or videos are a really good way to do that, but just make sure that you store them somewhere you can pull them out later if someone questions you. But all that said, we're going to say no now to this new requirement for winter grazing consents. This requirement has been... This requirement's been brought about by shoddy government legislation and exacerbated by poor government processes that mean that the systems embedded in the suite of rules that Colin just explained aren't ready to go. And the government refuses to acknowledge that by delaying the implementation until they're ready. So that's why we, these people up here, as elected representatives of Southland Feds, with the backing of our national team, are making a stand right now, and we're all saying we're not getting winter grazing consents. What we're not doing is making a call demanding that everybody boycotts the consents. This is a personal decision and a risk that everyone individually needs to think about and choose whether they take it or not. However, we're pretty confident as a group here that we'll have some safety in numbers. We're pretty sure we won't end up in this alone. They can't prosecute us all. And if they do decide to make an example of a couple of us, I know that as a rural community, we'll have each other's backs. And Feds has some pretty cool expertise that we can draw on to support us. So this is it. We're all standing up right now saying no to winter grazing consents. Who's going to stand with us? Thanks, everybody. That's a pretty awesome show, and I think that's pretty massive safety in numbers. And I have no doubt that on the live stream, there'll be other people joining us and around the country as well. So we'll keep this ball rolling. I'm sure we're not going to be the only ones. Colin wants to add something.
Thanks, Bridget.
And we're going to open for questions on winter grazing.
Yeah, we're open for questions now, so we've got the mics out there. We'll put that number up again, I suppose, can we?
Going.
Take one more, there you go. Yeah.
Nickel behind you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is that on? It is. Look, we've put a lot of work into actually finding a pathway. You know, we're between a rock and a hard place. And I have to ask you, is this the issue to die in a ditch on? We've made fantastic progress over the last 4 years, and that's why everybody's singing off the same song sheet. I've never seen the industry move so quickly, so congratulations. But the end game, and we've said farm environmental plans should be the pathway. We will be the first prototype. We have the opportunity to actually work with the sector, work with farmers to come up with a farm plan that is sensible rather than letting Wellington come. You know what will happen if it gets done in Wellington?
Yeah.
So don't lose sight of that.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I must say, I asked my staff to come up with a thing. I take the blame for that if you don't like it, but we want some clarity for people out there. Permitted activity, farmers are pretty smart. A lot of people will pick paddocks or leave pieces and they'll get under the 10%. For the ones in our old water and land plan, which is likely to become operative in the next year, we head up to 15%. So we're basically saying, you all submitted on that, this activity will be quite good. It's simple, tick box, and we also knew, even under our own plan, there would be people who needed a consent, but providing, once you've got a consent, you've got surety. Those are the three options, and as you know, if we do nothing and the government sends the EPA down here and they start handing out $1,000 fines, will feds pay for them? Let's be careful on this one. I'm more worried about Southland being planted in trees at the moment than I am about this issue. We've just about won this. We've led the country on this from day one, and we can continue to lead it. Let's come up with Southland solutions to Southland problems. We heard winter grazing laws was just Southland and Otago. Well, it's not. So just my plea is, as a regional council, we're trying to do the right thing for our people.
Yeah, and well done. You've done a really good job. And look, you're part of the... Well, you know, the regional councils are caught as well. You know, we had a meeting with our Canterbury Regional Council yesterday, and same sort of thing. That they're trying their best, and you guys have done too here. So, well done for you. And I just highlight how good a job, as I said before, how good a job the farmers have done about this. You've jumped ahead of the regulations. We've had some really good positive response, Bernadette.
Yeah, I'd just like to say this is not about undoing any of the good work that's been done, and it's also not a shot at Environment Southland. This is our expectation is that farmers continue to do everything they've been doing and continue to improve, but it's about saying that requiring all of us to get a resource consent to do that good job that we're already doing is not going to add any value. That's the problem. And we do acknowledge the process that Environment Southland have been through to create the deemed permitted activity, and there will definitely be some people who take up that process and continue to get a resource consent. We're very clear, we're not expecting that nobody gets a consent. There are plenty of reasons out there why some people won't be willing to make the stand that we're making. There's a raft of reasons. You know, people might, you know, be in share milking situations where they've got a farm owner that expects them to follow the legislation, and that's fine. Other people might have, there's a whole range of reasons why people may still get a consent or a deemed permitted activity, and that's absolutely fine, no judgment on that, and we fully expect everybody to continue to operate to a really high standard. But what we're saying, these regulations, and the Southland Winter Grazing Advisory Group was very, very clear that this was a package, that it could not be implemented without the farm plan pathway. The farm plan pathway is not there, and it is not appropriate to shove everybody into a resource consenting process because the systems aren't ready yet. So this is not about undoing any good work, it's about continuing the good work and avoiding ridiculous bureaucracy.
That's the minister's statement. We will have to hold it out, and that's our problem. It's the government's let us down.
Sorry, I'm reading as I'm reading it. So, government welcomes undertaking to improve intensive winter grazing practices. In return for the farming sector's commitment, the government has deferred the introduction of intensive winter grazing. This was back in March, by the way, March last year. Sorry, I should have read the date first, 16th of March 2021. In return for the farming sector's commitment, the government has deferred the introduction of intensive winter grazing practice regulations for a year until May 2022 while these improvements are made. The one-year deferment will enable an intensive winter grazing farm plan module to be rapidly developed, tested and deployed, ready for formal incorporation into wider certified freshwater farm plans in 2022. David Parker and Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor have always seen the freshwater farm plan regime as the key to achieving improvements in intensive winter grazing practices. We don't have the farm plan, so these regulations should not be going ahead. They are going ahead, so we're refusing to jump to that next step about resource consents.
Thank you, Bernadette and Colin. And the other issue we have with it, and you said it yourself, Nicole, it's a box-ticking exercise that we have the privilege to pay for something everybody is already doing.
Okay, about not being alone. The media are controlled by governments, world governments, New World Order. When you see how many farmers are processing around our planet globally right now that we are not aware of in our country is absolutely off the scale, you know? So you guys are not alone. And now, with the media controlling our information, how much information are they giving you is actually correct, and have they hidden the real truth? So what they're feeding us is gobbledygook.
Yeah, I think that was a statement. Look, I don't know, social media is an opportunity too. I watch some of the Twitter feeds from around the world, you know, and we do get the real story there as well. So, yeah. And as Andrew said, he's had some of the feedback from some of the international stuff too, so farming groups.
Yes, thank you. It's very wise, if you're going to get into trouble, make sure you get into trouble with plenty of people. Now, that was the advice I got from a barrister in Wellington when all this started to happen, and he said that to Joy and I. There just happened to be some High Court judges and a few other characters there. We're having dinner together. And I make that statement to my colleagues here. If we're going to get into trouble, let's support this group here. I call for that because our days will be numbered if we don't rally together. Now, on the other side of the legalities of signing a contract, and consents are a contract, and if they're not legally binding, why are you doing it? If the structure of the consent is not correctly formed, you could sign yourself into some form of litigation and end up in the courts. I think that's dangerous to go and sign a consent that's open-windowed because the government hasn't got the platform in. There's nothing there I can read that invites me in. And I want to congratulate you guys on taking this lead. Well done. Thank you. And that was a statement, I suppose.
Yep, statement.
Look, I just say nobody's looking for trouble, and we're certainly not going to be out there flouting anything and doing anything stupid. In fact, the opposite. Having stood up here and said that, you can bet your bottom dollar that our winter grazing will be top notch. We don't want to damage the freshwater. We don't want to harm animal welfare, and I know that none of you do either. So we're going to do the right thing and do it really, really well. We don't need a piece of paper to do it.
Yeah, but one of the things we really keen, I endorse Bernadette and the Southland guys, what they've done, but we still need to maintain and do a really good job, and we can have no complaints. That's the challenge, or I think it's probably the opportunity. We have these winter grazing modules that I think that there's beef and lamb, dairy and Z. We need to work through those and identify our issues, look at our critical source areas and all that sort of stuff. So we need to be doing a really good job. It's about, and you have done it, and you need to keep doing it. Look, I had a discussion in my, up in the Waikato there. It was about a month ago. I talked to the arable farmers up there, and I talked about the issues that's been going on with winter grazing. And the farmers up there, they saw the media stuff a few years ago, and they were a bit aghast, probably like all of us. But they didn't really understand the reason for winter grazing. So I think we've got another job to do. We've got to educate the rest of New Zealand why we need to undertake this practice, because they don't necessarily understand. I think that's another really important challenge I'm putting it out to you guys.
I have a question there that came from the audience, really on a clarification. Subsurface drains, do they require the 5 metre offset for subsurface drains? So just further explanation on where they fit in the winter grazing.
Look, I'm not sure. And I know you guys have a lot of tiles and drainage stuff in Southland. So.
No, they got excluded in the revised version of the rules, so subsurface drains are not included in terms of these standards. You don't have to worry about them in terms of intensive winter grazing or critical source areas. They were in there in the first place, which was a bit ridiculous. I've just asked how much consents are. Environment Southland might be able to answer that better, but I'm pretty sure off the top of my head for Southland it was a $1,700 deposit, but the costs beyond then depend on how much work is required to process the consent. I think the deemed permitted activity was $500 upfront fee. Yeah.
Canterbury, there's a deposit of $3,500. It could be potentially cost a bit more or a bit less, depending on how much work. They've said they haven't got the application form there, but it's potentially a whole lot of pages, and we're going to have that next week to understand that a little bit more from a Canterbury point of view. Jason said Otago was $1,900 as that a deposit? Deposit, yep.
Okay, just a question for you. All of this arises from the United Nations Net Zero Carbon and the plans that they've got for us, and our government has signed up to that in 2019. So I'm wondering why you guys are even trying to negotiate with a government that has got a preconceived plan and they're going to go ahead with it. They'll allow you a little bit of wiggle room maybe, but I want to know why.
It's an Andrew question, I think, for that carbon.
Sorry, I think there was something about UN or the IPC. Well, we're not anymore. I think we've made a pretty clear stand in terms of what our expectations are. That's our bottom line, and so I don't expect there'll be much in the way of negotiations. I'd be pleasantly surprised if there are, but yeah, I don't think we are. It's a simple answer.
Text question over here. If we all stand against getting consents, then what are Federated Farmers' recommendations on the slopes?
Well, the slope's the one that probably catches most people out. I don't know, look, Bernadette's got a lot more of history with her, so I think it was a 10 degrees average for a start, and then the Southland Winter Grazing Working Group actually came out with some of the stuff too, didn't you? Bernadette, you wanted probably, I think it was the second pathway, the farm plan process was probably where we really wanted to head with this.
So it's about the mitigations you put in place. Slopes are in there as a standard requiring more stuff around them because there's more risk of sediment runoff. So if you're doing winter grazing on a slope, I mean, Beef and Lamb and Dairy NZ are in the extension space, not us, but the general guidance is put some mitigations in place to protect against sediment loss. And what those are on your farm will depend on your farm. It may be that if it's next to a waterway, you need a wider buffer so that if some sediment does run off, it's captured by long grass at the bottom rather than running off over more dirt and straight into the waterway. Things like the direction of grazing. Most of you guys know this stuff, I think. With the direction of grazing, if you graze downhill towards the waterway, then there's that protected area at the bottom before you get there, or across the slope with a larger buffer at the waterway. Things like how you cultivate on the slopes, the direction of your cultivation, where you put your water troughs, how you feed out, all those kinds of things. But if you really need guidance on this, Beef and Lamb and Dairy NZ, the extension is their space. There's heaps of resources on their websites about how to protect waterways around sloping land.
What's happening if a farmer doesn't get a consent granted? And sub-question, do you need to get a new consent every year?
Well, I can probably speak from a Canterbury context. So we just met with the regional council. They're offering us consents, and it depends if you've got any other consenting process on the farm. They're trying to align it with that, but they're sort of suggesting we can get a consent out to 2029. But you've got to have a winter grazing module to go with it, and you need to update it. You could probably do one for 3 years, but gee whiz, I don't know. We've got 50 odd paddocks, and I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to go next year with my winter grazing. So it's a bit of a yes and no answer. Sorry about that. Yeah.
And in Southland, Environment Southland have brought it up to 5 years for a winter grazing consent. So am I correct? Yep. I think because it's a deposit, it's almost an open-end statement, really. Like, how many?
So once you get your resource consent, that's a proper legal document. And if there's anything positive about a resource consent, it gives you certainty. What it says in that consent, you're allowed to do, and no one can take it with you away from you unless the council calls it in. But essentially, that gives you certainty and means you can carry on and undertake those activities. And typically, you pay your deposit. The council will measure the hours to go through and get the consent issued, and then there'll potentially be more or less depending on how much work it takes. And then once it's issued, you pay your fee and you've got it. There may be a cost to come and monitor the consent, and that's certainly what, from a Canterbury context. Look, in Canterbury, we've had resource consents for farming for a number of years, so, you know, with all the dairy conversions wanting that went there. So that's, you know, we're pretty used to it in Canterbury. Essentially, if you're an irrigated farmer, you need to have a farming consent, and you need to have farm environmental plans and all that sort of stuff. So in Canterbury, we've got our plans already in place. So we're even more mad about this because the government want to have their overarching freshwater, so-called certified freshwater farm plans coming out and have the overreach of a bunch of other farm plans we've got. So there's a bit of a double up and potentially a bit of a transition going there. So it's hugely frustrating from a Canterbury point of view.
Will grass and baleage be classed as winter grazing going forward?
No, it's just those annual crops that are sown from year to year. So that's, you know, you typically your fodder beet, your Carlin, Swedes, and that sort of stuff.
Has Federated Farmers ever had the climate science independently reviewed?
We are doing that right now. There is, and forgive me, our policy advisor on this is actually in Germany. He'd probably be awake right now, actually.
Should we give him a ring?
So we have put a proposal to, we've put a series of questions to a group of climate scientists and sort of said what does the actual methane target need to be in terms of, if you ask it, in terms of what's no additional warming, what is the net zero equivalent, so the long-lived gas equivalent, what would it mean to, what reduction would be required if we were to go back to unwind all warming since 1990. So we've asked a range of questions to try and get from these proper scientists what actually should be a fair methane target. So we are doing that work at the moment. If you mean the whole climate change theory and everything it entails, we don't have that much money, sorry.
Hi, Andrew. heard Hosking interview Dave Frame the other day, and from Victoria University, our very own climate researcher, saying that the methane figures have been overblown by 3 to 4% and need reviewed, but the government aren't interested in looking at the information they have. You know, how can we get that information out, or how can we push that more?
So that is what Dave. So that there is what Dave Frame came up with. So he's actually. So yeah, Michelle. He's part of the et al. So Michelle Kane was the lead author on it, but Dave Frame was one of the other authors. So yeah, geez, been talking to Dave since about 2018 about this stuff, and yeah, I think it's actually him we've given this work to do, or his group. I mean, yeah, I kind of bang on about it all the time, so I always get frustrated when people say, have you heard about this? I'm going, God, does no one listen to me? Probably not. But yeah, and it's something we've just got to keep pushing it out there. I think amongst farmers, there is a lot of knowledge on this, but again, across the urban population, it probably hasn't gotten through as much, and that's probably because, you know, someone was talking before about the media, and it is like a bloody echo chamber in some of the mainstream media, particularly on climate change. They are very anti doing any of these sort of stories on this stuff. In fact, one of the main climate journalists in New Zealand basically insulted Dave Frame on social media and was saying, oh, he'd thrown his toys out of the cot and blah, blah, blah. Now, this guy's just a wet behind the ears bloody journalist kid out of journalism school, and Dave's actually got a PhD in this subject. He's recognised and lead author in the IPCC and all this, but this little upstart prick thinks he knows more than him. And, you know, that to me says something about, sorry, I'm going on a rant here, about some of the journalistic integrity we've got amongst some of the people out there. They're more opinionists than journalists, quite frankly, and you know, they need to get back to reporting, you know, what are the actual facts, what did this person say, what's the counter proposal, that sort of stuff, but they're injecting a hell of a lot of their own opinions, which they probably got with their Greenpeace membership. So, yeah, sorry. Sorry to the journalists that are going to interview me later. I wasn't talking about you.
Thanks,
yeah,
Andrew.
sorry, I've probably gone on too long. Yep.
Well, I appreciate what you say about the media, because how do we get to that, on that pie chart, the 17% and the 26%, the unshores and the ones that agree with everything? The media are so focused on kicking farming, the mainstream media. How do we get to that? We can talk on all the farming pages, but how do we get to that?
Well, I think the fact
percentage?
You heard it on Hoskings, which is New Zealand's #1 rated radio show, shows that it is getting out there and it is getting more and more traction. And so, but I think, you know, as an organisation, quite frankly, we've probably spent too much time under the hood, as it were, with all of this stuff, rather than just focusing on some of these messages. And, you know, probably that's our sort of, you know, we need to pivot in terms of trying to, as someone said before, trying to collaborate and do all that sort of stuff when we know that we've got a lost cause here, and actually just focus on pushing, like what you heard from Dave, out wider to the public and getting them understanding.
Last text for the evening, and it's a suggestion which I think you'll find helpful. Why not put a full-page ad in every newspaper throughout New Zealand showing the map with the methane? Can we bring the map up again one more time, please? Thank you. The world map.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, actually, Rebecca, you've just volunteered yourself to help me write my next Feds article.
No bother.
And yes, so eventually, yeah, sometime between AI and cows and talking this stuff during the day and then AI and cows again in the afternoon, I intend to do some stuff on this, and yeah, you can polish it up and get it out there. But Certainly, yeah, we do need to, and I think, yeah, to me that's a, picture tells 1,000 words, and it's a key thing to get out there showing actually where the challenges are, why the 30% isn't a New Zealand target, it's a global target, and there's simple mitigations that the globe can take. Sorry to rabbit on. If you look at North America, they've got a hell of a lot of oil and gas production there, but they actually got much more tighter regulations on their oil wells. So they're not, and you can see the difference in terms of, there's not the same amount of red spots. So you transfer that sort of level of doing the right thing across, and you're going to get those reductions. So, yeah, I think I've answered the question.
Yeah, hello. Sorry, I'm up again, but the question I have, given that you as a federation, and I take it you're in with the Southland and the Targa group, Andy, in supporting this initiative to stand, when we go back and speak to our colleagues who aren't here tonight, although there's a few hundred of us here, how do we bring confidence to them that, hey, we're going to stand out on the chill, or maybe we're going to stand in the sun together? And how do we bring about this cohesiveness that is needed to take such a stand? What is it going to look like instead of the words, just rhetoric from the front? Because when someone arrives at our place and they come from a regional authority, or there might be a range of different groups, as has happened in Southland, more than one or two or three or four or five vehicles, what are the steps that we're going to take when that happens? Is there anything behind the scenes planned? Because look, we want to watch the backs for each other. We're that type of people. If one's sick, we go and help them. So how do we do this? We need a big shake-up on how to do it, please. Got any ideas?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say what Bernadette had said before. The key thing is we will have your back if you're doing the right thing. So if you're looking after your animals, if you're looking after the land, you're protecting the waterways, you're doing all the right things, using the module, and someone decides to ping you for not having a piece of paperwork, I would dare say, we will be there to support you, along with every other farmer in the country. Because, to me, the government's made a promise, they've reneged on that promise, and now they're putting people in an impossible situation, because for all of us, for a lot of us, we've got to have consents to do our business. And yet they just seem, we've got to be, for my supply contract with Fonterra, I have to, abide by all rules, etc., and regulations, yada, yada, yada. And it also flows through to international markets. And, I tried to actually had a bit of an argument with David Parker on the 8th floor of the Beehive. He got quite animated about, and this was over the nitrogen reporting, about pushing that just back a month. But they just seem adamant on totally unwilling to admit they've made a mistake and change things. But yeah, to your question, and I think Bernadette probably put it better than I did, it is just a case of us all standing together on this.
Yeah, totally. Make sure you're doing the right thing. So make sure you've got your evidence that you are doing the right thing. But realistically, the regional councils have got pretty big fish to fry at the moment. They're not going to go looking and comparing and going, oh, that slope might be 12 degrees. I'm going to go back and check whether that person's got a resource consent. If everything looks good, they're not coming looking for us. So do the right thing. Make sure that you've got all your house in order. But yeah, look, I personally believe the biggest risk is going to come from some numpty taking a photo that appears on national television. We all know that those photos may or may not show actual bad practice. They can just be a photo that makes stuff look bad. And I think the biggest risk is going to come from that. We know that happens once or twice some years, not every year. And if people are doing the right thing, those photos aren't around. So do the right thing so there's nothing to take photos of. But yeah, if they turn up at your place and you've been doing the right thing and they're throwing the book at you because of these national rules and you haven't got a consent under them, give your local feds a call. I'd suggest being a member if you're not a member, but give your local feds a call if you're getting the book thrown at you over this stuff. And yeah, we will have you back. And it may well be a public shout out to say, hey, these people are getting the book thrown at them. We all stood up beside them. Now's the time. And far out. We've got how many people in this room and how many other people outside the room that are standing up. Jeepers, if everyone puts in $20, that's going to go a fairly long way towards backing a prosecution, especially with some feds expertise behind it as well. So we've just got to have a bit of faith, I think, in each other. Haven't got it all in place right now. We need to see how this unfolds. But if we're doing the right thing, the councils aren't going to come looking for you.
I'd just like to back up Bernadette's comments. Look, you've got to do the best you can and go to the extra mile. We want to have a good winter grazing session down here. Look, I'm quite clear with what the Southland executive have stated. It's an individual choice. It's not Federated Farmers saying no consents or get a consent. It's all individuals' decision. And we will back you if questions come. So do the best you can. Yes, we'll have you back, I suppose. That's the guts of it. But we're not giving anybody any advice, so we're quite clear about that.
I've just got one question in regards to the Fonterra's cooperative difference and having the necessary, over here, sorry. Just having the necessary consents in place to receive the cooperative difference. Could someone clarify that? Does that actually jeopardise getting paid out?
That's exactly why we're saying everybody has to look at this and make their own individual decision. We're not giving that kind of advice. We don't know what supplier arrangements you're under. We don't know what mortgage arrangements you're under with your bank. We don't know what agreements you have with your farm owners if you're a share milker or a contract milker. This has to be an individual decision, but talk it through with those people involved. The reality is this is a piece of paper that's going to add no benefit. So, you know, but look, we're not giving advice on that kind of stuff, and that's why we're not giving a direction to say we expect all farmers to boycott. That's not what we're saying. We're saying there's a bunch of us making this stand. If you want to join us, there'll be numbers.
Yeah, I was just talking to our bank the other day and I had the question, because we're from Canterbury, I mean, we've got a lot of resource consents up there with our farmers, so they want to know what's going on, whether you need a resource consent, because when we all go off to secure our seasonal finance for the year, the banks want to know. So just be aware of all the pitfalls, I suppose, potentially with your quality assurance schemes, your supply agreements, or the arrangements with the banks. So just being quite clear, you need to understand the implications for this. So we're not walking back from any of this, and we're not offering any advice. I think I'm quite clear on that. Yep. But as a bottom line, we want everybody to undertake those winter grazing modules that are out there and follow through with those, identifying all those issues that potentially might crop up, and do a really good job.
The other question I just brought with me tonight is what do you guys know about the SNAs? Is that another too big a topic for tonight? Yeah, just another worry in the back of most guys' minds starting to hear about these going on, and do you guys have any say on the matter?
So, in the bowels of MFE, there was a national policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity, which will deal with SNAs. Unfortunately, MFE's made the usual dog's breakfast of it. The last time we saw it, it was really bad. The aim of that is to provide a really good common platform across all councils that's workable for farmers. When that comes out again in draft form, we'll have another go at getting it right, but we still haven't got it right. So that's the simple answer. We don't want to fight SNAs in each district. We want common, sensible rules right across the whole country, and that's what the NPS was supposed to deliver. Does that answer the question? The other thing that was supposed to be about $150 million to help farmers, more money for QE2, et cetera, and a $20 million for 5 years came up. So watch the space at the moment.
Look, it's the 1st of November next week, and just our meeting with Canterbury yesterday, they've only had one application for a winter grazing consent. I think, is Southland had about 16, I think, or something? Not sure when you need to have them. Do you have to have them by the 1st of November, or is it when you start the winter grazing? So the other little thing with Canterbury, you just need to have the application in by the 1st of May or something, and it might, you know, if we will go and put a whole lot of consents in, there's no way they're ever going to get round to it anyway.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, could I seek a clarification, please, on the when proposal that Feds is likely to move with? It isn't clear to me what your action is as a national body. It's not clear to me what your action is as a local organisation. It is clear to me that you seem to be endorsing a world-first concept of taxing farmers agreed to by yourselves, a tax on production. Yes, Andrew, you can smirk, but this is serious stuff. You're agreeing to a world-first tax on yourselves, your own members. It's world-first stupidity. Nowhere else in the world has done it. Why are you doing it? Can you give me clarity that you aren't going to endorse that?
So that's our position. So we will not accept any emissions pricing unless we've got a scientific target on the methane, there are viable mitigations available, and there is no emissions leakage. Now, you've heard National, they're going to do that. That's what they're proposing. So all political parties are doing that. That is where we are at. So we will not be supporting the, based on that, assuming the National Council accepts that, we won't be, I don't see how we can be supporting the May proposal, so that's off the table. So we will not be looking at any options unless they meet those bottom lines. Now, if there is options that meet those bottom lines, then I guess my question would be, would it not be worthwhile getting this bloody topic off our backs? To stop getting all the crap thrown at us from Greenpeace and all the like that we're not doing our part. I know that those ones will probably keep going on, but you know, I want my kids to be proud of what I do as a farmer, and I imagine the same for the rest of you. That you don't want your kids reading in the paper all this rubbish that's spouted on. And I know, you know, the negative perceptions weigh on people. So if we can have a sensible system that for many will, you know, I liken it to somatic cell count. And for the dairy farmers in the room, if you've got a bad somatic cell count, you lose some money. If you're with certain companies, if you've got a good somatic cell count, you gain some money. And so I want to get to a position where it's more market driven, that it's from the, you know, the processors are the ones driving this, not the companies, not the government, and it's about linking up with the market. And, you know, if there is a mechanism that continues or encourages people to adopt best practice and do all the right things, if those bottom lines are met, then, yeah, I'll be happy with that, because I do want to stop all this crap being thrown at farmers. I don't want to keep prolonging these arguments. If we can put to bed some of this shit, then is that not worth it? So that's my answer.
Well, that's all fine and dandy, Mr. Chairman, but Mr. President, but in fact, it isn't you that imposes a tax on farmers yourself. It is the governments of the day that impose taxes, and you seem to be wanting to impose, regardless of your 3 points, a pathway to taxing yourself. It is unheard of in the Western world, unheard of. And I can't see how you're sort of deflecting it by your 3 points.
It is not a tax on ourselves. This would be a mechanism to help incentivise good behaviour change. So, I mean, look, and if we get it to the right level, and look, I don't believe anyone's going to go for they're not going to go for our proposal anyway, but I don't want to keep another 20 years of having this shit thrown at us.
It's not your call.
Well, I'm a farmer, so
Yes, so
this
am I,
is my
and
view.
It's
and
not
look,
your call to do this. It's a government's call to tax people. It's not yours.
well, actually, so the member response, we've had 2,000 responses from our membership. Now, yeah, there's about 46% say no to any mechanism, but there is 54% that have an interest in a mechanism, okay? So our membership is, so long as these bottom lines, this sort of stuff is met, our membership is, well, just over half of our membership. So it's a very finely balanced thing. But, you know, that's my personal view. You've got a different personal view.
Yeah, well, if you talk about leakage, I think you're going to get it.
We're just going to call things to a halt there. There's plenty of time to have a chat in person afterwards. To answer that question, Don, from a local point of view, Federated Farmers Executive Southland has been against He Wakanoa from day dot. We've put that out there in the media. We've been lucky enough to have a very robust discussion with the board today. And our position doesn't change on that. It's up to the other provinces to see where this lands. We thank the board, we thank Andrew, especially for those tough questions. We thank all the board for taking their time to come down here. You know the executive of Southland works as a team. You can contact any member of that team and we'll feed up the line if you have any concerns. I'd like to thank you all for taking your time out to come along here tonight to try to get a better understanding of this basically shitstorm that we've got thrown at us. So, yeah, thank you everyone. Under closing, there was a slide that people wanted some information on. It's been printed out and is available on the door at the door as you leave. And once again, thank you.